We've heard a lot about the Mediterranean diet, but I'm going to tell you about some other diets that are very consistent with that are perhaps consistent with your traditions as well. So our understanding around nutrition, its importance, comes right from public health, actually. And this is a well-known theory in health with respect to our health and well-being and aging. It's called the quantum health expectancy theory. So the idea behind this is that we're all born with a certain quantum of life, and that's based on our genetics. It's based on our fetal health and our parental health. So for example, people that might have been born to women in the Netherlands during World War II would have a very different demographic profile, health profile, than children born not 5 years later because they weren't exposed to starvation when they were in the womb. And so you have a very different health expectancy as a result of that. So it's based on that genetics that we have, as well as parental health and fetal health. Next, it's also based on the environmental assault. So if we're born with the best quantum possible, if we're exposed to pollution, for example, if we're exposed to wildfires, those sorts of things will affect our quantum of life. Also, healthful and unhealthful behaviors will affect our quantum. So unhealthful behaviors like smoking will shorten our quantum of life, whereas healthful behaviors like nutrition and exercise and laughter, as well as socialization, will extend or promote our quantum of life. Okay. And so I'm going to be speaking, as I said, about the nutrition side of things. And just again, in our last speaker, they talked about the blue zones. There's these well-known long-lived groups around the world, and they have some common elements to their common components in the way that they live. He spoke of the idea of socialization and laughter, which is certainly part of this, but also gender, positive attitude, cognitive stimulation, diet, and not being obese throughout life, non-smoking, and none to limited alcohol, and limiting your stress. And so you know that specifically keeping your weight within about a 10-pound weight of what's considered ideal for yourself throughout life will extend your life. Unfortunately, most of us don't tend to do that. There is some other research around this idea about telomeres. So telomeres are the things in our DNA that affect how long potentially we will live. And the shorter your telomere is, the shorter your life may be, and the life of the cells specifically that telomere is in. And so what affects these telomeres can be things like lack of exercise, obesity, smoking, alcohol, processed meat specifically, and psychological disorders. And the reason why these things affect the telomeres is through reactive oxidative species. They promote the reactive oxidative species, which causes inflammation in the body, but in the cell, it causes this reactive oxidative species, which causes cell death. Things that promote the telomere lengths, making them longer, are things like relaxation, exercise, antioxidant enzymes, vitamins, minerals, carotenoids, and polyphenols and omega-3s in our diet. So some key foods then to represent that would support our telomere length would be fruits and vegetables, legumes, fish, poultry, and whole grains. Not surprisingly, those are the base of what we consider a healthy diet. The reality, though, is that we eat not only for eating to live in terms of our health, but we also, quite frankly, live to eat. There were some wonderful pies, for example, today, some nice red meat that was on the table, as well as chicken today. So certainly our nutrition will help our body, head to toe, every system, every cell will be dependent on what we eat. So it affects our immunity, our healing, strength, endurance, ability to deal with stressors, genesis and progression of chronic disease like heart disease, cancer, and osteoporosis, as well as our healthcare use and longevity. So for sure, nutrition is a part of that, but also, of course, it's about pleasure, right, and quality of life. And it's one of those behaviors, exercise is probably also like this, that gives pleasure in terms of quality of life and also has these health benefits. The challenge, though, is that quality of life often is associated with things we shouldn't eat, unlike exercise, where the endorphins you get from exercise promote that quality of life as well. The trick, though, too, is that when we have these disease states, they also affect our quality of life, right? So it's sort of this circle that goes on, that if we are not eating as well as we should, we end up having a chronic disease that affects our quality of life as well, right? So there's this tension between eating to live and living to eat that we all have to experience in life. And I certainly like chocolate, and I had a small sliver of pie at lunch as well. So the importance of a high quality diet. So you want to basically be choosing as much of the foods you can that are nutrient dense. And so no matter what age you are, life stage, health conditions, a nutrient dense diet does you good. I can remember we have a research kitchen at the Research Institute for Aging over by the University Gates that some of you might have been at yesterday. And there's a research kitchen in the basement. It's not used as much by myself more in the recent past. But in that research kitchen, we were doing some menu development. And a researcher, actually, I should say a management leader from the university came over to check out the kitchen. And he said, why is this important? Isn't it just kids that need to eat well? We said, no, I mean, every cell of your body turns over continually, needs to be nourished, right? And so for us to just think that children, those that are growing, need good nutrition, no, we all need good nutrition throughout our life, okay? So it's not just at a certain time point. So what is nutrient dense? We'll get into that in just a moment. But basically, we need to remember that every body system requires nutrients. In fact, our brain uses a lot of the nutrients. And so some of the concern now that we're seeing with dementia is the idea that perhaps there's a coinciding malnutrition that might be part of that process too, that's leading to inflammation, but also not getting enough nutrients into the brain. How our body functions depends on what we eat. In terms of our muscle, for example, having enough protein in our body will affect how much muscle we have. What we eat is associated with a variety of chronic diseases as well, and I'll talk about a few of those in just a moment. And then many diseases are managed by diet. So think about cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, cancer, diabetes. They're managed by what we eat. And then finally, what we eat can help our recovery. And so a lot of folks don't realize that going into hospital and laying in bed for 3 days, you'll lose a few kilograms of muscle. And if you're not getting out of bed and also not feeding that muscle with protein in your diet, you're going to lose that muscle and potentially lose that muscle permanently, which is going to affect your recovery then from that hospital. So I do a lot of work, as I said, around malnutrition in hospital, in long-term care, and in the community. So it's really important to think about if you're going in for elective surgery, make sure, one, that you're eating well before you go in, you're eating enough protein, and then when you're coming in hospital and waiting to be discharged, make sure you're getting up and moving as much as you can to keep those muscles going and not cause their winnowing away, and also eating protein to maintain that muscle. Same thing as when you leave the hospital. You can talk more about that at the question period as well. So muscle independence is key. As we age, it actually is harder to keep the muscle we have. There's some endocrine changes that happen in the body that happen naturally as a part of aging that we can't change. And so what we need to do then is make sure we consume enough protein to override those effects. All right. So basically, when you're in your 30s, you need about 0.8 grams per kilogram body weight per day. When you're in your 60s, 70s, you need 50% more protein to maintain the muscle you have. So you need not only the substrate, which is the protein in your diet, but also the stimulus, which is the exercise piece, which I won't be talking about specifically in detail today. So we need about 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight per day to keep our muscle. The trick is to make sure that's lean protein and good quality protein. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail as we go forward today. You also need some key nutrients in enough supply, vitamin D specifically, carotenoids, selenium, zinc, B6, and B12. B12 and vitamin D are two nutrients that are a bit more challenging. We'll talk about them in a bit more detail again a little bit later on. Brain health. We know that people have called it the diabetes, type 3 diabetes is dementia. The idea that basically our brain uses most of the glucose that we have in our body, about 25 to 30% will be used by the brain. And if it's not being used well, we're going to potentially have some issues neurologically. But why we say it's often type 3 diabetes is because it has a similar mechanism, we think, as cardiovascular disease. It's the idea of saturated fat, calories, and alcohol are going to impact brain health as well as they do your heart health. And things that will decrease inflammation in the body, like antioxidants, omega-3 fatty acids, specifically from fish, are known to promote brain health, okay? So we need to think of the brain almost like we do the heart in terms of the types of ways we would feed it. And then heart health, finally. Lots of us already know this story. The idea of too much saturated fat, cholesterol, and trans fat will prevent, decreasing those will prevent cardiovascular disease, whereas obviously having too much of that will be negative. And you want to increase the healthier DHA, EPA, those fatty acids that are known to be in fish to help promote your cardiovascular health and improve insulin sensitivity in the
So
body.
our losses were significant.
It's not surprising that all of these organs tend to have the same issues. So if you eat a lot of saturated fat, it's going to affect your cardiovascular disease as well as your brain, probably, and potentially have increased risk for cancer as well. So similar sorts of diet etiology. If we look at the current situation in Canada, this is actually based on some of my research. One of my trainees looked at the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging, which is a very large study being conducted across Canada. It's a panel study that's going on for many, many years. And they've done now three waves of the panel. And so we looked at individuals in this study who are over the age of 65 and what were they like in terms of demographics. And so these are people that can answer a survey. So it's going to be biased, right? It's missing as well people that are Indigenous, people that are in the Armed Reserve, and it's missing people from the territories. So of those over the age of 65, 11% are widowed, divorced or separated is another 13%. So we're not getting probably the oldest age group either in this study. The idea is that we want to follow these people forward for 40 years and see how they change with age. Household income, about a third live on less than $50,000 at the time when this was done. This is the 2019 wave that we looked at. Overweight and obese, quite a large number. So over 40% were overweight and almost 30% were obese. Current smoking at 7%. Hypertension, 41%. Diabetes, 19%. Fair or poor hearing, about 11%, and poor vision, 6%. Self-rated health as fair or poor, 8%. No chronic health conditions was only 12%. So that meant a good portion had some level of chronic disease, and over a third were taking 5 or more medications, which is the definition of polypharmacy. Hyperpolypharmacy is more than 10 drugs. In terms of function, what did people look like? Well, poor hand grip strength, about 20%. Slow chair rise. This is getting out of a chair without using the arms, about 20%. Slow gait speed, about 30%. Using the ER in the past 12 months, about a quarter. Overnight hospital stay, about 10%. And visiting a doctor due to infection, about a quarter. What was of interest is, and why I did this study, is I do nutrition risk, as I said, in older adults living in the community, and created this tool called Screen, which is actually embedded into the Canadian Longitudinal Study of Aging. And the nutrition risk tool was associated with all of these outcomes. So was the first time we've actually been able to show that a self-administered questionnaire that measures nutrition risk can actually predict these health outcomes. So it's not just malnutrition, it's nutrition risk. And nutrition risk we described as poor eating habits, essentially, not eating the right amounts of fruits and vegetables, milk products, protein, weight changes, having challenges with appetite, eating alone, those sorts of things. So risk factors for poor nutrition, essentially. So let's talk about what is a high quality diet. So this nutrient dense diet. This is not energy dense. Energy is calories. Nutrients are vitamins and minerals and polyphenols and some of these other things in our food that are good for us, like fiber. So this means more vitamins, minerals, protein, and fewer calories. So less calories per mouthful. Less added fats like saturated and trans fat, sugars, and salt. So it's basically choosing whole foods over processed foods. And what you see on the right-hand side is the new Canada's Food Guide from 2019. It basically has half of our plate as vegetables. So we had 2 wonderful salads today. Filling up half of your plate with 2 of those salads would have been great. A quarter of the plate as a whole grain. So the bun, for example, in this case, it was a white bun, but at least we had grain on there. And then a lean protein choice as a quarter. So depending what you chose for dinner today or lunch today, you would have met that Canada's Food Guide. So this is what we would consider a nutrient-dense diet. So how can you tell if you're eating a nutrient-dense diet? One of the key things is look at food labels. And many people don't do this, despite being great information on the food label. How many people in the room look at food labels on a routine basis? Good for you. Most people. Excellent. Good for you. So you already know this information, that you look for the calories first off. You look as well for the nutrients you want to decrease. But one thing you may not know is that if you're trying to decrease a nutrient or you're trying to compare two products, say it's crackers, for example. Crackers are nice processed food that typically has a label. You want to decrease saturated fat. You're going to look for things that have less than 5%, means it's lower in that. In this case, this is actually an example of whole milk. It's 8%. So this would not be considered a low intake of saturated fat. It's actually above that. It wouldn't be considered high either. High is greater than 15%. So if we wanted to say we wanted to have a diet that, or a food product that had a high amount of vitamin D, for example, in it, or a high amount of protein, you look for saying at 15%, which it does here. So whole milk is a really good source of protein, is what it's saying. It's over 15%. However, it's also high in saturated fat. It's 8% total fat and 15% of saturated fat. So whole milk is high in those two things. You'd want it to be less than 5% if you're looking at reducing fat intake. So look at those two numbers, use 5% and 15%. 5% for things I want to be low in my diet, right? Less salt, less sugar, less fat, and things you want to be high, like the vitamins, and specifically protein as well as a macronutrient in your foods, look for above 15%. Those are better choices. So when you see two crackers now, you can say, one is a lot more sodium than the other by looking at that proportion, right? So it helps you compare. So some key recommendations around micronutrients specifically for older adults. There are some key nutrients that we actually need more of as we age. One is protein, which we'll get into in a bit more detail in just a moment. But calcium, over the age of 51 years for women and over the age of 71 years for men, you need more calcium. And this is because our body changes its ability to metabolize and use calcium. So you know that we have vitamin D that comes from the sun. It changes, our skin changes as we age. And one of the reasons why we need more vitamin D, but then the ability to take that vitamin D and use it to put calcium into the bones changes as well with age. So one of the reasons why we need more calcium in our diet. Often we find that older adults are not consuming enough calcium in their diet. It's really hard to get to 1,200 milligrams. A cup of milk, for example, is about 250 to 300 milligrams. You need 4 cups of milk a day to get enough calcium, right? There are some high calcium foods that are vegan, for example, beans, other legumes, some greens, but you need a large portion of them to get enough, again, of the 1,200 milligrams. The most recent osteoporosis guidelines actually came out this year, and they do recommend you get most of your calcium from food. The reason being, it's less likely to then become a calcium deposit and cause challenges in your arteries. We now know that high calcium intakes can cause some hypercalcemia and lead to deposition of calcium in your organs, which is not a good thing, right? Because it causes stiffening then of that artery or the organ that you have. It doesn't function well. So vitamin D, as I said, is another nutrient that we often don't get enough of, and the requirement increases again with age. This is because we know it's a really good anti-inflammatory nutrient, but it's involved in so many systems in the body, and we don't make as much of it from the sun as we used to when we're younger. So if you put a person outside with their skin at the age of 70 versus the age of 25, they'll make, in the same amount of time in the sun, they'll make less vitamin D. Okay, it's because of the changes that happen to our skin with age and the ability to hydroxylate and use that vitamin D once it's made in the skin and brought down to the kidneys and the liver. So you need more vitamin D in your diet as a result. It's often inadequate in diet and it's very low in most foods. It's really hard to find vitamin D in our food. How many of you had cod liver oil as a kid? Yeah, that's where you got your vitamin D from. Right? We don't do that anymore, right? We don't take a teaspoon of cod liver oil. Most of us would probably gag if we tried to do it again. My dad used to take cod liver oil every day, which was great, but we don't do that anymore. So where do we get our vitamin D? It's fortified in our milk products. Not all cheeses though, not all yogurts, but it is in fluid milk in Canada. It's fortified. In some margarines, it's also fortified, but not all. You can get it in a few key foods like eggs as well. But it's rare, as I said, in foods. So you have to get it through the sun and or take a supplement. So again, Osteoporosis Canada recommends actually taking a supplement about 400 international units a day to support your bone health with vitamin D. Vitamin B6 is another nutrient that increases requirement with age, and this is around the issue of the way that we actually metabolize vitamin B6 again in our body. It changes, but B6 is ubiquitous in our diet. We don't have a problem typically with it, so I don't get worried about it. B12 is a nutrient that doesn't have an increased requirement with age, but unfortunately, most of us as we age are taking some sort of gastric acid suppressant drug, which will affect B12 absorption then. B12 needs to be dismembered from food in the gut by acid. So you're taking antacids, Nexium or things like that, the PPIs that depress the acid in your stomach, you'll also be losing your B12. And if you're not consuming a lot of meat products or animal products which have B12 in them, you could be B12 deficient. So it's really important if you're on one of those medications for your acid suppression on a routine, on a continual basis, that you ask your doctor for a B12 test to see where you're at, because you want to make sure that you could check that. A B12 deficiency is pretty common actually in older adults. It can lead to some neuropathy, some other changes that might be mimicking actually dementia. And it can be reversed. So you want to catch it early. So about 30%, 10 to 30% of older adults have malabsorption of B12. Let's talk about protein. I started off with protein being important for muscle and independence. So as we age, we do need more high quality protein to maintain our muscle and function. So as I said, we need about 1.2 grams per kilogram body weight, or range 1 to 1.5 grams kilogram body weight. So for a 60 kilogram person, that's 60 grams to 90 grams of protein, which is quite a bit of protein. So we're going to do a little quiz in just a moment about which we think of has the most protein for the portion size. I advocate a variety of sources of protein. So animal-based proteins have some key nutrients that you won't get in vegetable-based proteins. For example, B12 is in animal products, and you won't see it as much in plant-based products. However, plant-based proteins have fiber, polyphenols, antioxidants. So a mix of the two is a good idea. Plant-based proteins are things like lentils, beans, legumes, right? We also think of whole grains, but they're not a great source, quite frankly, whole grains. It's really those beans, lentils, etc. Of interest, there was a study that was based on the Canadian CHS study. I'm trying to think what the acronym means. Anyways, the health study that they do routinely. The last version they did, which had the diet record in it, they looked at what vegetarians ate. And where did most of the protein come from? Can you guess, anybody, where most of the protein came from? Sorry? Dairy? Vegetarians and vegans. So where did it come from? It came from grains. And grains are actually one of the least viable sources or high quality protein sources. So that's a problem. We should be eating tofu, beans, legumes, and we're not as a Canadian society. We do need to do more of that. So let's do a little quiz, see what you know about protein. So which one of these would have the most protein per calorie? So you got to think about the fat content of the food as well as the protein content of food. So which one is most efficient, if you will, at giving you protein? More protein, less calories, more nutrient dense. Which one do you think it would be? Edamame? Okay, we got one for edamame. Quinoa? Salmon? Eggs? Any other takers? You're all wrong. So edamame is great, but it's actually not super high in protein. It's low in calories. Quinoa, the same thing. It's not high in calories, but it's not high in protein either, not super high in protein. Eggs are great, but they are, for 1 or 2 eggs, it's only about 14 grams of protein. Salmon has got a lot of fat in it. That's from a salmon. So the best choice is actually chicken. Skinless chicken breast is lean protein, very low calories and high protein, right? So if you want to have a protein boost, that's why all the bodybuilders do it. They have skinless chicken breast 3 times a day, because it actually has a really good hit of protein at 28 grams per 141 calories, so 0.2 grams per calorie. Okay. So let's look at some high protein foods. So just give you examples. So here we're trying to find a typical portions and what they give you. So this is showing you you'd have to eat more of the plant-based proteins to get the same amount of protein, okay? So I'm not saying don't be more plant-based than we have been in the past, for sure, but you have to also realize you need more of it, which can mean more calories depending on what the food is. So Greek style yogurt is a great choice. It would be an animal-based protein at 18 grams, right? Cottage cheese, also pretty good choice, half a cup, 12 grams. Soy beverage, kefir, cow's milk, 1 cup, about 8 grams, okay? So again, to get your calcium, you need about 4 of those a day. You'd get 4 times 8 is 32. If I was a 60 kilogram woman, that's half my protein needs from milk alone right there. Peanut butter, 2 tablespoons is only 8 grams. It's actually a lot of calories in 2 tablespoons of peanut butter. I should put the calories up here too, so you can see that differential. Hard-boiled egg is about, I think it's about 70 calories, 6 grams or so of protein. Edamame, 1 cup, about 14 to 18 grams. Almonds, 6 grams for 23. So that's not really, and almonds have a lot of natural fats in there, which are good. They're good fats for sure, but it's calories. If you are trying to watch calories and not gain weight, then that's an issue. Hard cheese, 10 grams. Tofu is a very good choice, 20 grams at 1 cup, and pretty low fat choice too, right? Tofu is very low in calories. Chicken is a good choice, and then canned tuna, preferably water canned tuna as well, that has lower fat. So just give you a sense of the variation. That you can have a smaller portion of tuna, for example, as compared to a cup of edamame, right? So what eating patterns are healthy? And so again, our last speaker talked about the blue zones and Mediterranean diet, but also Okinawa, which doesn't follow the Mediterranean diet, but follows a healthy diet. So there's more than one healthy diet is my point. A lot of people get caught up about, well, I must eat a Mediterranean diet. I must eat this way, especially if it's not part of your tradition. Many of our traditional foods are healthy, right? People who live in South America, for example, eat a lot of beans and legumes, extremely healthy, right? And so we shouldn't try to move them away from that to say, oh, you must eat Mediterranean style, which also has beans and legumes in it, but different types of ways of preparing them. So Mediterranean style diet has lots of research behind it. Why so many people know about it, I think, is there's lots of research behind it, lots of publicity behind it, but there are other healthy diets. The DASH diet is one specifically designed for hypertension and to reduce sodium intake and increase potassium intake to support healthy blood pressure. Mind Diet and the Brain Health Food Guide. Brain Health Food Guide actually came out of Canada, out of Baycrest, and they're very similar in terms of being close to the Mediterranean style diet. They're actually a mix of the DASH and Mediterranean style diet. A healthy diet pattern like Canada's Food Guide, but also you want to try to emphasize more the mono and polyunsaturated fats. So there's actually other fats than olive oil that also have monounsaturated fat. And so choosing some of those like avocado oil and others that are also equally good in terms of monounsaturated fats. You want to increase your fruits and vegetables, of course, increase vitamin D intake if you can, and getting sufficient protein. So I've made a little chart to compare some of the key ones: Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, Mind diet, Brain Health Food Guide. You probably can't see those numbers, and that's not the point. I wanted to show you, though, that there's similarity across them all. And my next slide shows you the things to decrease in your diet, the things to increase in your diet that are consistent across all of these healthy diet patterns. So I do this with my students in my class. They think, oh, Canada's Food Guide is old fashioned. It's not healthy. Mediterranean diet is the same. They realize they're actually the same thing. It's just way you choose your food. So the things that are common in these diets, things to reduce, are trans fat. Fortunately, in Canada, we had a policy around removing trans fat from our food supply. Some trans fat is naturally present in milk products, for example, but all of the processed foods should have most of the trans fat removed from it. Packaged foods. I just came back from Japan, and they have a lot of packaged food. I couldn't believe that. I thought, here we are, the country that people are supposed to be super healthy. Well, they're not eating the traditional Okinawa way, that's for sure, in Tokyo. Everything's packaged and refined. There was no brown bread to be found anywhere. It was all this refined milk bread with lots of sugar actually in it. So packaged foods, try to reduce those. When you package something, they typically put sugar and fat in it, right? Red meat, processed meats especially, are bad. Sodium, but also the nitrates and the fat content of processed meats. Butter, cream cheese. So limiting these things. Use them just for the special occasion that you want to use them for. White bread, roti, or pasta. Try to use a whole grain pasta. I must say I haven't gotten to whole grain pasta. I don't eat a lot of pasta, but I prefer white, Italian sort of brands. I haven't gotten to the whole wheat. I just find it too gummy. But anyway, sweets, pastries, cakes, and other baked goods, especially if they're not homemade. If they're homemade, it's better because you're going to be using typically better fats in them and reducing the sodium and salt content. Frozen desserts, potato chips, salty snacks, candy, pop, and juice. Those are things to reduce in your diet. So things to increase in your diet that are consistent again across all those food plans are vegetables, several servings a day if you can. And so you had the opportunity, as I said, to have probably 2 or 3 servings or maybe 4 servings of vegetables at lunch today. A serving isn't much. It's about half a cup to 1 cup, depending on what the vegetable is. Fruit and berries, whole grains, and fiber added to them if you can. It's challenging to find whole grain breads, actually. You can find whole wheat breads, but to try to find those that say whole grain on the ingredient list is actually very hard. There's just a few producers that have them. Regardless, choosing a bread that's whole wheat and has fiber. So look for that fiber on the ingredient label or in the nutrition facts label is key, and protein as well. Often the whole grain buds will have more protein. Fish weekly, preferably, and preferably a fatty fish. This is where salmon does come in because it has that more of that DHA and EPA fats that you want to have. So fish that are bred in cold water will have more fat, which is a good thing for our body in terms of the DHA and EPA. Nuts daily, and preferably walnuts, if especially you're trying to think about prevention of dementia. So there's something specifically about walnuts, and I can't tell you what it is right now because I can't remember. That's not good saying it much for my walnut intake, is it? But walnut specifically has some components that are very good for the brain. Low fat dairy, so 1% milk, for example, low fat yogurts, Greek yogurt, for example. Lean protein sources, so poultry, fish, soy milk, yogurt, and kefir. Beans and legumes several times a week. You can, olive oil, water, and using herbs and spices. I must say over the last 5 years, there's a big explosion in interest in plant-based proteins like beans and legumes. It's so much easier to see recipes for these. And I follow some of those on Facebook, and you may too, but making big tortillas out of lentils, for example. That's a really great way to boost your protein intake as well as reduce some of the white grains that might be in your diet. So let's look at just micronutrient supplements. So a lot of people will take a micronutrient supplement, often as insurance, because they're concerned about the quality of the diet. I'm not so concerned about multivitamins, but I am concerned about individual nutrient vitamins. And this is because some of the nutrients that are on the shelf can be in doses that are very close to what we call the upper tolerable limit. And once they get over that upper tolerable limit, you could actually start to see toxic side effects. Okay. Now, not all nutrients will have the TUL, and this is because we haven't seen those side effects yet. So I wouldn't consider any bulk nutrient safe at any dose. All right. So even if it doesn't have a TUL, this tolerable upper limit doesn't mean it's safe at any dose. You're safest to get your nutrients from food because your body has a really good way of digesting and dissecting and knowing that you don't need any more of it. When it's in purified form, in a pill, your body can't do that same job of eliminating it. So some key ones to watch out for are folate. Folate because it will actually mask a B12 deficiency. Those 2 B vitamins work in tandem. And if we already talked about B12 potentially being a problem with older adults, if you have too much folate and you take it as a pill, it could actually mask a B12 deficiency. You can get in some challenges then. The key thing you can see here is that maximum upper limit here is 1,000. And note that's only 2.5 times the recommendation. So some nutrients that are very close is what I'm saying to what the recommendation is, which is this row, and what would be the upper limit, which you don't want to go over. Another one would be vitamin D. So again, 400 international units recommended by Osteoporosis Canada, not 5,000 international units. I get a little bit scared when people come up to say, "Oh, I'm taking 5,000 international units of vitamin D." I'm going,
Money
"That's
goes in and then you
above
start
the upper
making.
limit." And did you know that when you take too much vitamin D, it actually can cause hypercalcification in the body? They go, "No, I didn't know that." We found that out because people are taking intravenous doses of vitamin D and having kidney disease after that because they had hypercalcification of their kidneys. Calcium is the other one here that I've got in red. So 1,200 milligrams is we're trying to get in our diet, and 2,000 is the upper limit. Again, because too much calcium, our body doesn't want it in serum circulation. It's either going to put it in the bones and store it there, or it's going to calcify it into our organ tissues and veins and arteries. And so you don't want too much calcium, you just want the right amount. And so this is why, again, food is best. In addition to nutrients we talked about today, you also get phytochemicals, which are not considered vitamins and minerals because they're not essential to health, but they certainly optimize our health. Antioxidants, enzymes and coenzymes like enzyme Q10 that people will take off the shelf, right? You can get that in your food. Other healthful food components as well, okay? So like fiber, for example. And every day we're coming out with new knowledge on what's in our food, so sticking to our food is best. If you're interested in learning more about some of the work around nutrition risk that I've done in the past, but also I've highlighted here, this is a website, there's actually fact sheets around weight, appetite, cooking for one, grocery shopping, challenges you may have, shopping, cooking for one, as I said, eating alone. Any of the challenges that might push someone towards being a nutrition risk. There's fact sheets on this website.
Tomorrow you'll have an account
that might be useful to you, or to the other people
those
that you know.
returns won't be real. And when you're ready to take out your money that doesn't actually exist, that's a problem for me. That is an opportunity because I'm just going to charge you a processing fee of
today is that we should eat a nutrient-dense diet to maintain our health.
Zero in
Every
your
system in our body
so I can
is
keep
based on
scamming
what we eat. Okay, it doesn't survive without
I want to show you
hydration,
that's from the
adequate nutrients, and adequate protein and energy. There's some specific nutrients that we talked about: calcium, vitamin D, protein, and also focusing on nutrient-dense food to maintain that vitality as we age. There's some other key nutrients or key foods that come out of those better health plans. Cruciferous vegetables and leafy vegetables. Having a leafy vegetable every day or cruciferous vegetable, that's your broccoli, your cabbage, your Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. Those are the cruciferous vegetables because they have certain aroma and comes out of some of their polyphenol content. Berries, if you can have that every day, even frozen berries, right, are good for you. Fatty fish, nuts, a variety of lean protein, including plant-based proteins as well as animal-based, to make that combination, that variety, and what you need in your diet. I'll speak briefly about some of the research I do, since I didn't talk about that at the beginning, just if you are interested. And there's a bit more information over here on the Schlegel RA table. So as I said, I do research more around vulnerable older adults in our community. So I do work in acute care hospital, looking at when people come into hospital, they often are malnourished. You might be surprised to find out 1 in 2 people coming into a hospital in Canada is malnourished. And many of those people are older adults. And that's based on a standardized physical exam that we do looking for nutritional status. So going into hospital often means someone's going to have malnutrition. And then in hospital, what happens to them? And so I've worked with teams across Canada, hospitals across Canada, about developing best practice and how we can then roll that best practice out and scale it across Canada. Things, for example, nutrition risk screening on admission. So we know if you're having a challenge, you get to see a dietitian within 2 days, so that hopefully your recovery is better. That's the sort of thing that this is part of this process of care that I've developed. That's my acute care work, and I've worked a bit on transitions out of hospital into home and primary care as well. I do nutrition risk screening in the community, you saw with that past slide. And so I've created nutrition risk screening tools that are used in Stats Canada surveys, are also used in doctors' offices and other places like that to identify people that might have nutrition problems who could have that intervention and prevent perhaps frailty down the road. So I've done that work as well and continue to do that work in the community. My other community-based work is around persons with dementia specifically, and those individuals who are recently diagnosed with dementia and getting them involved in exercise and nutrition programs, as well as socialization programs like cooking with youth from the university. So I do those sorts of things as well. We actually have a cooking together program. If you're local to this area, cooking together program. We'd love to have more participants who are interested in that if they have concerns about memory issues. Then I do work as well in long-term care. And specifically, I'll highlight two projects that I'm working on. One is around hydration in long-term care. So we found out, obviously, during COVID-19, major issues in our long-term care system. Things we already knew, quite frankly, but we're under bright, shining light because of COVID-19. People are not being offered fluid outside of meals and they can become dehydrated, and people obviously needing support at meal times. So I created a hydration program for use with staff in long-term care that we're testing out. It's called Promote. And then a second program, which is around improving the mealtime experience, because we recognize the mealtime, that social interaction, that physical space, that psychosocial space is extremely important to the quality of life of older adults in long-term care and can also improve their food intake. That's the work that I do. So with that, I thank you very much and welcome any questions you may have.